Welcome back to the Farm Show on Westplex Talk 1045 FM for Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2026. Love is in the air, but no love for weeds. In our first segment today, that's A block, we talked about the dicamba tolerance system. And today in B block, we're going to talk a little bit about 2,4-D. That's the Enlist weed control system. The Enlist system, it's been around for a while. It's gained a huge amount of market share. And there's still some questions about 2,4-D formulations, about control, about best practices in using the Enlist system. And thankfully, the folks from Enlist put together a session called Enlist Weed Control System, Best Management Practices, and Common Questions. Now, you can find this by going to Enlist's website and looking up the Enlist Weed Control System Best Management Practices YouTube page. You can also always go to enlist.com. And before we begin, I'll let you know that later on this month, February 26th to be exact, the folks at Enlist are putting together another one of these sessions. It will begin at 8 a.m. Central on February 26th, and you will get one CEU credit for taking part. They'll also do another one on March 26th. You can find more information about those sessions by going to enlist.com. I went through the entire session and pulled out a few highlights. Most importantly, the FAQ that the Enlist team put together, the frequently asked questions from growers. I'll also note that this entire thing was put together by Kelly White. She's the field marketing manager for Enlist. We also have Ron Geis, the market development specialist for the northern part of Iowa, and Jared Walls. He's the market development specialist. He's based down in Tifton, Georgia. We'll go right into that FAQ part. Kelly asked, why doesn't Corteva recommend using Enlist alone?
But it's really about weed resistance management. When we look at the history of resistant weeds, a lot of what has led us to our problems is single modes of action. When you look at the chart here, these are the different chemical classifications. That first gray bar that got the early jump, well, that's triazine, that's atrazine. And the number of resistant weeds, I mean, you were seeing 60, 70, 80 weeds resistant to atrazine. That got eclipsed with the ALS chemistry. Okay, so you think about ALS, pursuit, pursuit, nothing but pursuit, was used on a lot of the soybean fields. And that quickly had a lot of weed species develop resistance to it. The ACASE inhibitors, those are like your volunteer corn killers. I mean, they still kill volunteer corn, people. Don't panic. But a lot of grasses became resistant to those because it was what we were using. You're going to see the EPSP, if you don't know what that is, that's glyphosate, guys. And you look at the number of resistant species with that. But a lot of those, they were just single modes of action going out there to control, a weed complex. That's a short-term thinking. It's not as if we're getting brand new modes of action coming out every year. It's been a lot of years since a new mode of action has come out here. So really from day one, we wanted to see tank mixtures with Enlist One. If you think even the tank mixtures that Jared was showing earlier, if you remember, even on glyphosate-resistant weeds, we were seeing improved response with glyphosate, even though we know glyphosate wouldn't kill that population by itself. But you do get that enhancement just by having two modes of action working against a weed, even if one's not, all that effective. But just that combination will stave off weed resistance for a much longer period of time.
Another frequently asked question is, what's the difference between 2,4-D choline and other 2,4-D formulations? Jared tackled that one and even compared Corteva's 2,4-D formulations to dicamba. A little bit of comparison there. You'll hear Jared explain drift studies here too.
So there is a huge difference between 2,4-D choline. Not only is 2,4-D choline the only legal application that you can make on the Enlist system or Enlist traded crops. and we've seen a lot of issues in the past with dicamba, with unauthorized use or off-target movement. So we don't want to see that with ours. So we knew going into this that we needed to create a product that addressed a lot of the issues that growers face with traditional 2,4-D products. The first of that is less physical drift. So Ron mentioned the Colex D technology. That is our drift package that is in the tank or in the jug already with Enlist One. And that provides about 90% less drift than traditional 2,4-D formulations. And because of that, we only use approved tank mix partners with Enlist One or Enlist Duo. And that is done every year. Anytime a company wants to include a product into our uh, approved tank mix list, we have to submit that and do the test to make sure that it does not compromise that drift control. The second piece to that is the near zero volatility. So unlike dicamba or other products, we wanted a product that didn't require an addition to that tank to reduce the volatility. And so I'll show here in just a minute some of the things we did, but 2,4-D choline between the esters and the amines are 96 to 88% respectively less volatile. The other difference is Enlist was the first herbicide to be evaluated and approved through the ESA risk assessment. So we kind of paved the way, and that goes back to the way we launched the product and the way we have stewarded our product throughout the years. We went through that process, and that's why we have the freedom and the freedom to operate through 2029. All right, Kelly, you can go to the next one. All right, so with that, we have looked at a lot of drift scenarios. Again, this was a large scale drift study. I believe this one was in Wisconsin. So this was a 7.5 acre block that was sprayed, looking downwind at soybeans. Now, if we had a susceptible crop, anything downwind, that would be a no spray scenario. But one thing that we do bring with Enlist is that soybeans are not one of those susceptible crops. But we did see no injury on those beans, and you can see in the graph the distance that it traveled was very minimal. So following the label and doing what you're supposed to do with nozzles and gallons per acre, we rarely see any drift issues. And just to go a little further, again, everybody knows, I believe, that tomatoes are probably one of the most sensitive crops to 2,4-D. And again, in this situation, if tomatoes were downwind, this would be a do not spray scenario. We never want to spray when tomatoes are downwind. But to simulate this, what we did is we looked at two different nozzles. So we had an XR, which is not labeled. It's not an approved nozzle on the Enlist label, and then an AIXR. Okay, so we looked at two different nozzles. We looked at 2,4-D amine formulation and Enlist One, and looked at the distance from the furthest tomato plant that was downwind. Okay, so looking at 2,4-D amine with an XR nozzle, it moved roughly 57 feet. Just by changing the nozzle on 2,4-D amine, it did reduce it, but still it still traveled quite a distance. Moving to Enlist One with the non-labeled nozzle, the XR, it still moved 42 feet, but less than even the AIXR with the 2,4-D amine. So moving even further into the AIXR, moved roughly 23 feet. So just with the formulation and looking at different nozzles, we see significant reduction there. And then looking at the spray drift affected area, so of that distance, the area that was affected, we reduced the affected area by roughly 60% there just by changing the formulation and changing the nozzle.
Now, as we know, drift and volatility are two separate phenomena. Jared just explained drift, but he also had some relevant data on volatility as well.
And so again, to go back to not having to add anything into the tank like other products, what we did is we actually took the chemical compound of 2,4-D and changed it. So if you notice, without getting into too much chemistry here, on the top you have an uncharged acid and an uncharged salt. And so what 2,4-D is typically the acid is what penetrates into the leaf, and the amines and the cholines and the ester salts is what keeps it stable. So we changed the formulation on the chemical structure in 2,4-D choline to actually charge those to charge that acid so it can hold on to the salt longer and keep it more stable on the surface. And that's why we don't require a VRA in the tank with 2,4-D choline. And just to look at the data again, just showing the difference there in formulation. And real quick, this was a study done down here in Georgia, and we had these all across the country as well. And what we did is we sprayed different blocks with the esters and the cholines and the amines, and we sprayed bare ground, and we put cotton plants in 8 different directions around that sprayed area. And what we saw is up to 70 hours after application, the only detection we could find in the choline getting up and moving was on that first bar to the left. And it was very, very small. You can barely see it. And that was on those first plants. So again, we're very confident in the volatility aspect of 2,4-D choline.
Jared went a little further in talking about why Corteva's 2,4-D formulations are superior to generics.
Another difference that we have is that we are proud that we put up to $4 million a day in R&D, and that's for new tools and traits and herbicides. And a lot of our unauthorized 2,4-D formulations, they don't bring that to the ag industry like we do.
If you're just joining us, we're playing select highlights from a webinar put together by the folks at Corteva for the Enlist weed control system, particularly best management practices and common questions. That was Jared talking a little bit about the difference between Corteva's 2,4-D versus generic formulations. Why do growers need to worry about rainfall after applying 2,4-D?
Well, herbicides are absorbed into plants, and we need actively growing plants. Herbicides are absorbed into plants, but we kind of have the notion that once that spray is dried, well, then that's done with absorption, and that is not the case. All right, so when we look at this chart, the red is palmer, you have water hemp, you have giant ragweed, and then horseweed, mare's tail. If you look at the first 2 hours, you're getting, a pretty good jag of that chemical into the plants. But even 4 hours later, 6 hours, or all the way even into 24 hours, there's still more absorption going on. So we design a rainfast period. What our official rainfast period on Enlist is 4 hours. But you can see even on some species, unfortunately, palmer, we would kind of like a little more time than that if that's at all possible. But the idea here is, okay, once 65% has been absorbed, you will probably end up with satisfactory results on that field. But certainly you can see where 24 hours will give us much more uptake into those plants. So that's the importance of those rainfast periods.
Another frequently asked question: what about using your dicamba nozzles to spray Enlist's 2,4-D? You can imagine how Ron feels about that.
All right. My wife would say, don't be a smarty pants and say you only use them if you don't want them to work. But that's what we have found in our high plains, dry plains out here, where it's nothing but corn and beans. The movement onto non-target crops like soybean, like non-Enlist soybeans or alfalfa, there's such a minimal effect that we stay away from those dicamba approved nozzles. My idea is you box them up, you put them on the shelf, and do not open until using dicamba. We just don't use that with anything else but dicamba. Well, why? Those dicamba approved nozzles put out extremely coarse droplets, ultra coarse droplets that are designed to keep the spray on target. That's number 1, 2, and 3 as to why those are designed. Well, what we want is the best coverage that you can possibly get, and extra coarse, ultra coarse is not going to give us. Why? It's because of the size of those droplets. You take the same volume at 500 microns, getting 1 drop on a leaf in this example. That same volume at 250 microns will give you 8 drops on the leaf. And oh, by the way, each of those 8 drops are significantly lighter than the 1 drop. So the chance that they just fall off of that leaf is substantially less. Or you go down to 250 microns, where things are getting pretty fine, and then you get a much more coverage. So it's all about getting that right droplet size that will give us keep it on the field, but give us the most droplets possible.
Kelly served up another frequently asked question. Why bring Enlist herbicide tolerance to corn? And won't that just encourage resistance? Ron answered that one.
So first thing I want to say is having that tolerance trait in the corn doesn't guarantee that Enlist will be used in the corn. We'd like to see Enlist used, but it is an option, and we like to bring solutions and options to farmers. Peace of mind. When we look at about 20% of the corn market receiving dicamba, which is a group 4 herbicide, just like Enlist, that 20%, has the risk of whatever movement dicamba would bring you, plus the crop response that we've got a little ahead of me there. The crop response that we would normally see with the dicamba, the twisting and some of those things. So neighbor-friendly application plus the crop safety. The other part of this is it's imperative that we look at Enlist in corn as being additive, not a replacement, but an additive to our already good measures that we're using in corn. If you feel the need that you've got to have a group 4 because of weed problems, your choices now are a group 4 dicamba, or now with the Enlist corn, Enlist on those same acres. But this is additive, not a replacement for good weed resistance management.
We're coming up against break here, but I want to play one more of the FAQs. Why do Enlist E3 soybeans show cupping? Here's what Ron said, and listen closely. He even got to do a little bit of bragging about Enlist market share.
Well, with all the acres out there of Enlist, 65% of the total acres are out there. If you do have off-target movement, odds are it's going to be hitting an Enlist field. So Enlist is going to take a disproportionately large percentage of those acres. But it's really the either off-target movement from treated fields of dicamba or the lack of sanitation within our system, whether that's a sprayer that wasn't amply cleaned out, or tender equipment, or inductor units, or even something as simple as like a measuring device. If it has low doses of dicamba in it, you're going to see that on non-dicamba beans, and the majority of those are being Enlist.
I like that little bit of chest thumping from Ron there about the Enlist system and market share. You know that if Bayer had the market advantage with Extend soybeans, they would be thumping their chest in much the same way. If you want to catch the entire webinar, you can look up Enlist Weed Control System on YouTube. And again, there are at least two more of these webinars taking place. One is February 26th at 8 a.m. Central. Another is March 26th at 8 a.m. Central. And again, you do get one CEU credit for attending the webinar. And here in this segment, we just touched on a few of the highlights. There was some great information about controlling kochia, about the use of glufosinate, etc., etc. And you can catch all of that when you listen to the full webinar. When we come back, glufosinate resistance, water hemp, we're going to hear from a University of Illinois specialist when we come back.